Have you ever pulled over at a random roadside stand, your stomach rumbling after a long drive, and grabbed a quick, greasy burger without a second thought? You chew, you swallow, and maybe you wonder for a fleeting second about the hygiene. But what if the secret ingredient wasn't just unsanitary but completely unspeakable? After hearing the story of Joe Metheny, you might never trust a roadside barbecue pit ever again. Most serial killers are terrifying because they hide in plain sight, wearing the mask of a charming neighbor or a quiet coworker. But Joe was different. Standing at a massive 6'4" and weighing 450 pounds, one look at his hulking, disheveled frame practically screamed danger. Yet people still blindly ate right out of his hands. Born in 1953 in Maryland to a family of 6 kids, Joe's childhood was a masterclass in misery. His father was a severe alcoholic who died in a car crash when Joe was just 6, and his mother was practically a ghost, consumed by her heroin addiction. Bounced relentlessly from one foster home to another, he never knew stability. Joining the army at 18 was supposed to be his ticket out, but instead, it became a gateway to his own crushing addictions to cocaine and heroin. Discharged and disconnected from his family, he drifted into the bleak underbelly of South Baltimore. Ironically nicknamed Tiny by the homeless community he lived among, he blew every dime he earned as a forklift driver on booze and narcotics. But miraculously, against all odds, the 1990s brought a brief glimmer of redemption. Joe got a steady job, bought a trailer, married, and had a son. For a fleeting moment, the giant had tamed his demons. But history has a cruel way of repeating itself, and the fragile illusion of his perfect life shattered in the blink of an eye. Coming home one afternoon, Joe walked into a completely hollow trailer. His wife, his child, the furniture, everything was gone without a single trace. Word quickly reached him through the grapevine that his wife had run off with another man, sinking so deep into addiction that she resorted to prostitution, eventually losing custody of their son to the state. Fueled by a blinding primal rage, Joe armed himself and ventured into the darkest, drug-infested corners of the city to hunt down his wife. But when he arrived at the filthy, abandoned bridge where she was supposed to be, she wasn't there. He didn't find his family that night. Instead, he found 2 homeless men, a stash of drugs, and a dormant, monstrous bloodlust within himself that was about to be unleashed in a terrifying 7-hour massacre. Beneath the decaying concrete of that abandoned bridge, surrounded by soiled mattresses and the suffocating stench of despair, Joe's mission to save his family completely evaporated. He sat down with 2 homeless men, Randy and Randall Brewer, and eagerly partook in their drug stash. But the narcotics didn't numb his broken heart, they short-circuited whatever trace of humanity he had left. In a sudden, explosive fit of unprovoked violence, Joe turned on the 2 men. With an axe, he didn't just kill them, he systematically butchered them, hacking their bodies into pieces in the cold mud. But the taste of blood didn't satisfy his rage, it only made the beast inside him hungrier. Wiping the gore from his hands, Joe left the bridge and tracked down a woman who was acquainted with his ex-wife. Playing the concerned husband, he lured her in with the promise of a fresh hit, desperately trying to pry information from her. When she claimed she didn't know anything, his frustration boiled over into pure sadism. He brutally assaulted her, wrapped his massive, calloused hands around her throat, and squeezed until her desperate struggles stopped entirely. He tossed her lifeless body into a nearby thicket like a discarded wrapper. Insatiable, he repeated the exact same horrifying ritual with another vulnerable woman just hours later. But then, the night took a turn that proved just how cold-blooded Joe had truly become. While dragging the second woman's corpse toward the riverbank for disposal, a sudden noise made him freeze. An elderly man was sitting quietly on the shore, night fishing in the dark. A normal criminal would have dropped the body and fled into the shadows. Joe, however, didn't even flinch. He calmly picked up a heavy metal pipe, stalked up behind the oblivious fisherman, and shattered his skull with a single devastating swing. 5 lives. 7 hours. He weighed the bodies down with cinder blocks and tossed them into the dark waters, leaving one rotting in the bushes and taking 6 souvenirs from the others. You would think a rampage this sloppy would end his reign of terror immediately. And for a moment, it did. 2 weeks later, Joe was arrested for the murders of the Brewer men and thrown behind bars for 18 months. The nightmare should have been over. But then came the most catastrophic failure in Baltimore's judicial history. Prosecutors couldn't find enough physical evidence. They opened the cell doors and let the giant walk free. And the man who stepped back onto the streets wasn't just a killer fueled by a broken heart anymore. He was a predator who had just discovered his true calling, and he was about to turn his sick obsession into a horrifying local business. Stepping out of the prison gates, Joe Metheny wasn't a reformed man, nor was he the heartbroken husband he once claimed to be. The frantic hunt for his runaway wife was entirely forgotten. In the cold isolation of his cell, he hadn't been repenting, he had been plotting. He had developed a new terrifying appetite, and he needed the perfect hunting ground to satisfy it. Playing the part of a man desperately looking for a second chance, Joe went back to his former boss at the pallet company. He begged for his old forklift job and convinced the owner to let him live in a rundown trailer right on the company's isolated lot, pitching himself as a free night watchman. The boss agreed, unknowingly handing a relentless serial killer the ultimate, secluded slaughterhouse. It didn't take long for the blood to spill. Joe lured 2 more vulnerable women to his remote trailer using the familiar bait of narcotics. Once the heavy trailer door clicked shut, their fate was sealed. He assaulted them, took their lives, and then methodically dismembered their bodies. But this is where Joe crossed the line from a ruthless monster into a real-life horror movie villain. He didn't just bury them in the dirt. He butchered them. He packed the meat into neat little Tupperware containers and shoved them right into his freezer, burying only the unusable remains in shallow graves. Why save the flesh? Because Joe had an entrepreneurial spirit. He set up a small, rustic barbecue pit by the side of a busy Maryland road and opened up an open-air burger stand. He ground up his victims, mixed their remains with heavily seasoned pork and beef, and served them up as specialty burgers. The most sickening twist of all, the customers absolutely loved them. Friendly locals and weary travelers lined up, chewing their food and praising the unique flavor, completely oblivious that they were consuming the missing women of South Baltimore. Joe later bragged with a chilling, arrogant smirk that if you mix it right, nobody can ever tell the difference. Business was booming, but a successful barbecue stand requires a steady supply chain. And Joe's freezer was starting to look dangerously empty. With the freezer empty, the grill was about to go cold. And for a man who had tasted a twisted kind of success through pure evil, shutting down his roadside stand simply wasn't an option. He needed fresh inventory. In early December 1996, Joe set his sights on a 23-year-old woman named Kimberly Lynn Spicer. Lured into the desolate pallet yard, she met the same gruesome fate as the others. Joe coldly took her life, temporarily stashing her lifeless body in the freezing yard as he prepared for his next horrific harvest. But Joe was getting greedy, and his hunger for cruelty couldn't be contained. Just days later, he invited another woman, Rita Camper, back to the trailer under the guise of sharing narcotics. When she bravely fought off his sickening physical advances, Joe's mask completely shattered. He violently tore at her clothes, his booming, demonic laughter echoing over her terrified, breathless screams. He leaned in close and chillingly promised that she was going to end up buried in the cold dirt just like the rest of the girls. Then came the twist that finally broke the monster's terrifying winning streak. The very thing that made Joe an unstoppable force, his massive, hulking 450-pound frame, suddenly became his ultimate downfall. Heavy, completely out of breath, and deeply intoxicated, Joe stumbled. Operating on pure, desperate adrenaline, Rita slipped right through his massive fingers. She burst out of the metal trailer door and sprinted blindly through the pitch-black maze of wooden pallets, ignoring the tearing of her own skin as she scrambled frantically over a razor-sharp barbed wire fence. Joe could only stand there in the freezing night, a breathless, lumbering giant, watching the red taillights of a passing pickup truck that had pulled over to rescue her and speed off into the distance. Paralyzed by a sudden, crushing panic, he ran back and made a frantic phone call to a friend, begging for help to bury Kimberly's body before the cops swarmed the lot. What Joe didn't realize was that the friend on the other end of the line wasn't going to grab a shovel. He was going to grab the phone and hand the devil straight to the police. In December 1996, a swarm of police cruisers descended upon the pallet yard, their red and blue lights cutting through the bitter winter night. Joe Metheny didn't put up a fight. The monstrous butcher was finally in chains, bringing an abrupt end to the most stomach-churning barbecue business in Maryland's history. But if investigators thought the nightmare ended with his arrest, the interrogation room proved them dead wrong. Joe didn't just confess, he bragged. He calmly claimed to have taken the lives of 10 people, painting a picture of depravity that left hardened detectives physically ill. He casually recounted burying one victim's severed head in the woods, only to dig it up 6 months later, wash away the maggots, and violate the skull all over again. To Joe, these women weren't human beings. They were disposable playthings. They were inventory. When the trial arrived, the courtroom braced for a desperate plea of insanity or a defense blaming drug-induced psychosis. Instead came a twist that chilled the gallery to the bone. Standing before the judge, the massive killer didn't shed a single tear or beg for mercy. He looked the court dead in the eye and actively demanded the death penalty for himself. When asked why he committed such unspeakable atrocities, Joe's answer was devastatingly simple and devoid of any humanity: because I liked it. He flatly stated that the words, "I'm sorry," would never leave his lips because it would be a lie. Though he initially received his dark wish for the death penalty in 1998, the judicial system faltered again, overturning his sentence to life without the possibility of parole. Joe Metheny ultimately died in his prison cell in 2017 at the age of 62, his massive, decaying body finally giving out. The monster is gone, but his gruesome legacy lingers. So, the next time you pull over at a desolate roadside stand, your stomach rumbling as you smell the sweet, smoky scent of roasting meat, you might just want to step on the gas and keep driving.